World War II, known as the bloodiest war in the history of human civilization. It was fought between the Allied forces, whose alliance consisted of the USSR, the United States of America, the United Kingdom, and the Republic of China, and the Axis of Evil, whose alliance consisted of Nazi Germany, the Japanese Empire, and the fascist government of Italy. World War II, by general consensus, began on the 1st of September 1939, triggered by the German invasion of Poland, resulting in Britain and France declaring war on Germany 2 days later. World War II had over 24 million military casualties, and the total death toll from 1937 to 1945 was over 73 million. In this video we will be going over a battle of the Eastern Front, the Battle of Stalingrad. The Battle of Stalingrad, which went from the 23rd of August 1942 to the 2nd of February 1943, consisted initially of 457,000 personnel, 5,200 artillery pieces, 900 tanks, and 900 aircraft. Army Group South was selected for a sprint forward through the southern Russian steppes into the Caucasus to capture the vital Soviet oil fields there. The planned summer offensive was codenamed Case Blue. It was to include the German 6th, 17th, 4th Panzer and 1st Panzer armies. Army Group South had overrun the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic in 1941. Poised in eastern Ukraine, it was to spearhead the offensive. Hitler intervened, however, ordering the Army Group to split into two. Army Group South, A, under the command of Wilhelm List, was to continue advancing south toward the Caucasus, as planned with the 17th Army and the 1st Panzer Army. Army Group South B, including Friedrich Paulus's 6th Army and Hermann Hoth's 4th Panzer Army, was to move east towards the Volga and Stalingrad. Army Group B was commanded initially by Field Marshal Ferdinand von Bloch and later by General Maximilian von Wiese. The start of Case Blue had been planned for late May 1942. A number of German and Romanian units that were to take part in Case Blue, however, were besieging Sevastopol on the Crimean Peninsula. Delays in ending the siege pushed back the start date for Case Blue several times, and the city did not fall until the end of June. A small action was taken in the meantime, pinching off a Soviet salient in the Second Battle of Kharkov, which resulted in the envelopment of a large Soviet force on the 22nd of May. Case Blue finally opened as Army Group South began its attack into the southern Russia on the 28th of June 1942. The German offensive started well. Soviet forces offered little resistance in the vast empty steppes and started streaming eastward. Several attempts to re-establish a defensive line failed when German units outflanked them. Two major pockets were formed and destroyed, the first, northeast of Kharkov, on 2nd July, and a second around Milevro, Rostov Oblast, a week later. Meanwhile, the Hungarian Second Army and the German 4th Panzer Army had launched an assault on von Zoreth, capturing the city on the 5th of July. The initial advance of the 6th Army was so successful that Hitler intervened and ordered the 4th Panzer Army to join Army Group South A to the north. A massive traffic jam resulted when the 4th Panzer and 1st Panzer both required the few roads in the area. Both armies were stopped dead while they attempted to clear the resulting mess of thousands of vehicles. The delay was long and it thought to have cost the advance at least a week. With the advance now slowed, Hitler changed his mind and reassigned the 4th Panzer Army back to the attack on Stalingrad. By the end of July, the Germans had pushed the Soviets across the Don River. At this point, the Don and Volga rivers were only 65 kilometers apart, and the Germans left their main supply depots west of the Don, which had important implications later in the course of the battle. The Germans began using the armies of their Italian, Hungarian, and Romanian allies to guard their left, which was on the north, and flank. The Italians won several accolades in official German communiques. Sometimes they were held in little regard by the Germans and were even accused of having low moral. In reality, the Italian divisions fought comparatively well, with the 3rd Mountain Infantry Division, Ravenna, and 5th Infantry Division, Crossaria, proving to have good moral, according to a German liaison officer, and being forced to retreat only after a massive armoured attack in which German reinforcements had failed to arrive in time, according to a German historian. Indeed, the Italians distinguished themselves in numerous battles, as in the Battle of Nicolavia. By this point, the German 6th Army was only a few dozen kilometers from Stalingrad, and the 4th Panzer Army, now to their south, turned northwards to help take the city. To the south, Army Group A was pushing far into the Caucasus, but their advance slowed as supply lines grew overextended. The two German army groups were not positioned to support one another due to the great distances involved. After German intentions became clear in July 1942, Stalin appointed Marshal Andrei Yermolov as commander of the Southeastern Front on the 1st of August 1942. Yermolov and Commander Nikita Kuremechev were tasked with the planning of the defense of Stalingrad. The eastern border of Stalingrad was the wide river Volga, and over the river, additional Soviet units were deployed. These units became the newly founded 62nd Army, which Yermolov placed under the command of Lieutenant Gen. Vasily Chikidov on the 11th of September 1942. The situation was extremely dire. When asked how he interpreted his task, he responded, "We will defend the city or die in the attempt." The 62nd Army's mission was to defend Stalingrad at all costs. Chikidov's generalship during the battle earned him one of his 2 Hero of the Soviet Union awards. On the 23rd of August, the 6th Army reached the outskirts of Stalingrad in the pursuit of the 62nd and 64th Armies, which had fallen back into the city. Kleist later said after the war, "The capture of Stalingrad was subversive to the main aim. It was only of importance as a convenient place in the bottleneck between the Don and the Volga, where we could block an attack on our flank by the Russian forces coming from the east. At the start, Stalingrad was no more than a name on the map to us." The Soviets had enough warning of the Germans' advance to ship grain, cattle, and railway cars across the Volga and out of harm's way, but most civilian residents were not evacuated. This harvest victory led the city short of food even before the German attack began. Before the Heer reached the city itself, the Luftwaffe had rendered the river Volga, vital for bringing supplies into the city, unusable to Soviet shipping. Between the 25th and 31st of July, 32 Soviet ships were sunk, with another 9 crippled. The battle began with the heavy bombing of the city by General Oberst Wolfram von Richthofen's Luftlottel IV, which in the summer and autumn of 1942 was the most powerful single air formation in the entire world. Some 1,000 tons of bombs were dropped in only 48 hours, more than in London at the height of the Blitz. Much of the city was quickly turned to rubble, although some factories continued production while workers joined in the fighting. The 369th Croatian Reinforced Infantry Regiment was the only non-German unit selected by the Wehrmacht to enter the city of Stalingrad during assault operations. It fought as part of the 100th Jaeger Division. Stalin rushed all available troops to the east bank of the Volga, some from as far away as Siberia. All the regular ferries were quickly destroyed by the Luftwaffe, which then targeted two barges being slowly towed across the river by tugs. Many civilians were evacuated across the Volga. It had been said that Stalin prevented civilians from leaving the city in the belief that their presence would encourage greater resistance from the city's defenders. Civilians, including women and children, were put to work building trench works and protective fortifications. A massive German strategic bombing on the 23rd of August caused a firestorm, killing thousands and turning Stalingrad into a vast landscape of rubble and burnt ruins. 90% of the living space in the Voroshilovy area was destroyed. Between the 23rd and the 26th of August, Soviet reports indicate 955 people were killed and another 1,181 wounded as a result of the bombing. Casualties of 40,000 were greatly exaggerated, and after 25th of August, the Soviets did not record any civilian and military casualties as a result of air raids. Approaching this place, Stalingrad, soldiers used to say, "We are entering hell," and then after spending 1 or 2 days there, they say, "No, this isn't hell, this is 10 times worse than hell." The Soviet Air Force, the Voenno-Vonchilny Sili VVS, was swept aside by the Luftwaffe. The VVS bases in the immediate area lost 201 aircraft between the 23rd and 31st of August, and despite meagre reinforcements of some 100 aircraft in August, it was left with just 192 serviceable aircraft, 57 of which were fighters. The Soviets continued to pour aerial reinforcements into the Stalingrad area in late September, but continued to suffer appalling losses. The Luftwaffe had complete control of the skies. The burden of the initial defense of the city fell on the 1077th Anti-Aircraft Regiment, a unit made up mainly of young female volunteers who had no training for engaging ground targets. Despite this, and with no support available from other units, the AA gunners stayed at their posts and took on the advancing panzers. The German 16th Panzer Division reportedly had to fight the 1077th gunners shot for shot until all 37 anti-aircraft guns were destroyed or overrun. The German 16th Panzer Division was shocked to find that due to Soviet manpower shortages, it had been fighting female soldiers. In the early stages of the battle, the NKVD organized poorly armed workers' militias, comprised of civilians not directly involved in war production for immediate use in the battle. The civilians were often sent into battle without rifles. Staff and students from the local technical university formed a tank destroyer unit. They assembled tanks from the leftover parts of the tractor factory. These tanks, unpainted and lacking gun sights, were driven directly from the factory floor to the front line. They could only be aimed at point-blank range through the gun barrel. By the end of August, Army Group South B had finally reached the Volga, north of Stalingrad. Another advance into the river soon followed. By the 1st of September, the Soviets could only reinforce and supply their forces in Stalingrad by perilous crossings of the Volga under constant bombardment by artillery and aircraft. On the 5th of September, the Soviet 24th and 66th Armies organized a massive attack against the 14th Panzer Corps. The Luftwaffe helped repulse the offensive by heavily attacking Soviet artillery positions and defensive lines. The Soviets were forced to withdraw at midday after only a few hours. Of the 120 tanks the Soviets had committed, 30 were lost to air attack. Recognizing that the German troops were ill prepared for an offensive operations during the winter of 1942, and that most of them were redeployed elsewhere on the southern sector of the Eastern Front, the Stavka, which is the term used to refer to the high command of the armed forces in the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union, decided to conduct a number of offensive operations between the 19th of November 1942 and the 2nd of February 1943. These operations opened the winter campaign of November 1942 to 3rd of March 1943, which involved 15 armies operating on several fronts. The forces at the beginning of the battles are as follows. Personnel: 2,183,000. 23,701 artillery pieces. 1,394 tanks. And 1,847 aircraft. Out of the 847 aircraft, 732 were owned by the Axis, but only 402 of those were operational, whilst the Allies had 1,115. In autumn, the Soviet generals Georgy Zhukovkov and Alexander Valasevsky, responsible for strategic planning in the Stalingrad area, concentrated forces in the steppes to the north and south of the city. The northern flank was defended by Hungarian and Romanian units, often in open positions on the steppes. The natural line of the defence, the Don River, had never been properly established by the German side. The armies in the area were also poorly equipped in terms of anti-tank weapons. The plan was to punch through the overstretched and weakly defended German flanks and surround the German forces in the Stalingrad region. During the preparations for the attack, Marshal Zhukov personally visited the front and, noticing the poor organization, insisted a one-week delay in the start date of the planned attack. The operation was codenamed Uranus and launched in conjunction with Operation Mars, which was directed at Army Group Center. The plan was similar to the one Zhukov had used to achieve victory at Khalkhin-Gol 3 years before, where he had sprung a double envelopment and destroyed the 23rd Division of the Japanese Army. On the 19th of November 1942, the Red Army launched Operation Uranus. The attacking Soviet units under the command of Gen. Nikolai Voltin, considered one of three complete armies: the 1st Guards Army, the 5th Tank Army, and the 21st Army, including a total of 18 infantry divisions, 8 tank brigades, 2 motorized brigades, 6 cavalry divisions, and 1 anti-tank brigade. The preparations for the attack could also be heard by the Romanians, who continued to push for reinforcements, only to be refused again. Thinly spread, deployed in exposed positions, outnumbered and poorly equipped, the Romanian Third Army, which held the northern flank of the German Sixth Army, was overrun. Behind the front lines, no preparations had been made to defend key points in the rear, such as Kalkach. The local response by the Vermachit was both chaotic and indecisive. Poor weather prevented effective air action against the Soviet offensive. On the 20th of November, a second Soviet offensive was launched to the south of Stalingrad against points held by the Romanian 4th Army Corps. The Romanian forces, made up primarily of infantry, were overrun by large numbers of tanks. The Soviet forces raced west and met on the 23rd of November at the town of Kalach, sealing the ring around Stalingrad. The link-up of the Soviet forces, not filmed at the time, was later reenacted for a propaganda film, which was showed well. worldwide. So guys, I hope you enjoyed that video on the Battle of Stalingrad. Just a few quick things before we go to the rest of the outro. One, I had a great time doing this, lots of fun, 30 hours or so of work, 10:03 right now, PM. The program that I used to record all of the footage from War Thunder was Fraps. Program where all the footage was recorded from is War Thunder. It's a online World War II massively multiplayer online. 3, program used for all of the video editing, Adobe Premiere Pro. And for all of the voice recording was Windows Voice Recorder. So yeah, hope you enjoyed, and enjoy the rest of the intro. Bye-bye.